Hello, welcome to my studio and welcome to this video. And today what I want to do is really share how I might go about building up an abstract painted page in my sketchbook. Now in a previous video I shared a simple drawing exercise exploring and creating shapes, and in this video I want to share how I might use some of those shapes from that exercise and incorporate them into a painting. So I'm going to share how I might go about constructing a painted acrylic abstract page in my sketchbook inspired by shapes. So first off, I'm going to suggest that we paint an underpainting, and this is a sort of blobby, splashy page with no real thought of composition. It's an opportunity to get your paints out and play with colour and enjoy the interactions of different colours to create a sort of splodgy, colourful mess of paint really. And you might want to explore applying the paint with different tools and different size brushes, and it's just an opportunity to understand how different colours and the paint works on your sketchbook page. I do these kind of pages in two different scenarios really. One, when I'm wanting to use up paint on my palette. So if I've got any spare paint, I will just smear it and smudge it and blob it onto a page. And this isn't meant to be a painting, this is an underpainting. So this is the beginning of something. I will also do a page like this if I'm wanting to think about colour combinations, colour interactions, how different colours work next to each other. I find that just thinking through doing is really helpful, and actually this page here really helps me on some paintings I'm already working on. I really liked this sort of dark brown next to this blue and the way some of this pink interacted with some of this kind of bluey turquoise. And I've taken those tiny little moments, tiny little sort of poetic passages, and I've used those to inspire something else I'm working on. But now I'm going to use this as basically a starting point for an abstract painting that involves some of the shapes that I've created using exercise I shared in the video last week. And here I'm just looking at the different shapes and thinking, actually, what am I finding interesting? There's something down here that I'm finding quite interesting. And I also really love this shape up here. I'm just going to, maybe these star shapes are, I'm just going to use these shapes in a painting and see what happens. And I enjoy trying things out in my sketchbook. For me, a sketchbook is like a low pressure place. It's a place where anything goes, a playpen for my art. So let's talk a little bit about paint in sketchbooks. This is a heavy body acrylic paint. It is quite matte. So I'm using, it's a brand called Sennelier, and it's called Abstract Innovative Acrylic. And the reason I quite often use this in my sketchbook is because it's matte. So it means that the pages don't stick together. Often, if you are using a heavy body paint that has a bit of gloss or shine to it, that will stick your pages together. So another paint that's great to use in sketchbooks is perhaps acrylic gouache, which also has a very matte texture. There's also lots of flat and matte types of acrylic paint these days that don't have any gloss or shine, and they're the best ones to use in a sketchbook. So this is the underpainting. I just wanted to show you inside this sketchbook, because all the pages in this book were created using a kind of underpainting, and then I've gone over the top and added extra layers to sort of make a more complete composition. So that's the kind of thing we're going to be doing today. So once our acrylic underpainting is dry, we're now going to go over the top and we're going to draw some of our shapes over the top and create a kind of composition using those shapes. And just using a coloured pencil or a graphite pencil, and some of those pencil marks might show through, so that might influence your choice of colour. And we're really just going to experiment, drawing some shapes across the page and seeing what we like in terms of composition. And we might want to explore different size of shapes, so kind of big and small shapes, a variety of different shapes together, and just see how they interact and work as a whole. It's really an experimental exercise, so we don't need to overthink it. We can kind of start and respond to what's on the page. So I'm just going to draw some shapes with a pencil over the top and basically go from there. And when there's this much paint, it's sometimes hard to see what's going on. But it's only a sketchbook, isn't it? So at the end of the day, I don't really think it matters. what happens actually, I'm here for the ride. So I'm just copying one of these shapes, sort of quite loosely, I have to say. So that's one sort of shape I've put here. Now I'm going to add in another one up here. And I'm kind of not being very precise, as you can see. I'm holding the pencil at the end. Then I might add something else in here. So I'm just going to draw a couple of shapes on both of the pages, and then we'll come back and add some paint. And if there are particular bits of your underpainting that you love and that you want to remain exposed, that might be where you place a shape over the top. So the shape is sort of made up of the colour underneath. I liked this bit here, so I'm sort of putting a shape around it, and I think I'm going to paint around it so it emphasises this bit. So there we go. I've drawn a few of the shapes over the top in pencil. There's now a decision. Do I paint the shape in a solid colour, or do I paint around the shape to emphasise what's underneath it? I'm going to start just with one colour. I'm going to use this Titan Buff, which is a sort of nice cream colour. I'm just going to use it straight out of the tube. I've picked a colour which is quite opaque. Acrylic paints have got different opacities, and so an opaque paint will cover what's underneath a bit better, but still give a bit of an echo of what's there. And the contrast between the sort of smudgy paint and the more definite opacity can be quite interesting. You often find that things emerge, little sort of interactions that just look really interesting. I'm just putting on a bit more paint to cover up what's underneath a little bit more. So this shape, I'm going to create a negative space by painting around it. The shape is made up, the space in the middle. So if I was working on a canvas, this kind of thing might be how I start. A sort of painting emerges. So our drawn shapes are really just the loosest of guides, and it just helps, I find, to have a little bit of structure when we're adding our next layer of paint. But often when the paint hits the page, then it's important to respond to what's happening on the page and not feel that you have to be tied to what you've already drawn. I'm actually cutting up this shape into two different shapes, and that's sort of how I might start to use some of those shapes from that previous exercise where we're just drawing shapes, try and incorporate them into a page. And this is still a bit of a messy thing, isn't it? And what I do is do the same on this page and then let it dry and come back and add another layer and emphasise the things that I really like and cover up the things that aren't working until something emerges out of the layers of paint. And when this paint, this next layer of paint, this sort of cream, is still wet, I might go through it with a pencil and just add in a bit more interest. And so this pencil, what it's doing is it's taking off the wet paint, building up a rich surface. So I'm going to do the same with this side here, just adding in paint, and then probably let it dry and then come back and add another layer and another layer. A playful attitude. I just think a sketchbook is for trying things out, isn't it? And sometimes when I go in with the paint, change the shape a little bit. I quite like that little pink diamond, so I might just leave that there. Enjoying the properties of acrylic paint where you can create layer after layer. So this cream colour has dried now, and what I like to do is think about what are the things I'm really enjoying and liking, and what are the things that I think need a bit of changing. So I'm really liking the way that this kind of shape here has got a lot of different elements to it. So it kind of travels up the page. I'm liking this big area at the top here, and the fact that it's got like this little pointy bit, the corners. I just think that shape works really well next to this star and this diamond. So that kind of composition I'm actually really liking. And that was a sort of accident because I drew some shapes, started to add paint, and then they just sort of connected. And I liked that, how it happened. And then when I look at this page, I'm not quite as pleased with this page. There seems to be not as much kind of connection between these shapes. This felt like there was a relationship in the negative space between these shapes that I found more pleasing. So I think what I want to do next is maybe connect some of these shapes together so that they feel more in relationship with each other, and that actually some of this white peeping through is a bit distracting. So I might want to make these shapes more cohesive by adding in a colour over the top. So I've got a bit of cerulean blue, and I'm going to try and link these shapes. See what happens. And I think I like what that has done. It's sort of created a more interesting shape out of this buff cream colour. Now I'm going to take out some of this white. And now I've kind of got a composition that I think I'm quite liking. I think I'm going to join this here. And here I'm sort of thinking about verticals and horizontals. So by adding a few extra sort of lines, I'm trying to make it work as a whole so that it feels like the shapes are in relationship to each other. I've used this cerulean blue to sort of link and connect the shapes so that now they don't look as much as though they are floating in space, but they have a kind of connection and relationship to each other. I've added in verticals and horizontals, and now I'm thinking that this yellow buff colour that I really liked before actually needs to be paler. Now I've taken down some of that white, I feel that I could add more white over the top. And this is how it goes, isn't it? Just making one decision after the next decision. Thinking about the overall composition. Does it feel like a unified whole? Does it feel too busy? Does it feel like a mess? I can see that things are beginning to happen. Out of all of those smudges and smears, there's something, a structure that is beginning to emerge. And that's just half the fun, really, of playing with acrylic paint. You can really add layer after layer and see what it does. And you know, at one point you might think, oh, actually, do you know what, I liked it 3 layers ago. And that's why we use a sketchbook, isn't it? That's why we experiment and try things out and just be willing to, you know, not make perfect pages, but just to think, actually, what is it that I'm liking? And there's definitely the way some of these odd shapes have appeared. You know, it isn't what I initially drew on the page, but when you start to add the paint, it just, that kind of, this shape here just seemed to come out of the paint, and I just really like it. You know, if that's the only thing that comes out of this page, then I'm happy for that. So this sketchbook has got paper which is 160 GSM. So it's not super thick paper, but it seems to stand up to acrylic paint quite well. So I'm adding in white, and I've got a tiny bit of cerulean blue on my brush. And when I'm painting over the sort of pencil marks, it just creates interesting, rich surface. Here I'm sort of painting over some of the lines. You can still see the echo of them though, so it's still part of the sort of structure of this page, but maybe not quite so obvious. So this is where I have come to with this page, and I'll probably leave it at that. But I hope that you can see that actually just a simple drawing exercise can lead you to incorporating some shapes into an abstract painting. You know, this isn't finished necessarily, but there are things in it that I'm enjoying. And really, we just started with a blodgy, splodgy underpainting, drew in some shapes with a pencil, and then made some decisions about what we were going to paint over and in to create this composition. And you can see here that actually once I started kind of mapping out a composition, I actually ignored some of the things that I'd drawn. And that's often the way, isn't it? You start with an idea, but actually in the process of doing it, something else comes along. Painting is often a game of addition and subtraction. What are we adding? What are we taking away? What are we revealing? What are we concealing? I like some of the history that is embedded in this page. So some of those marks and lines that came from the pencil scribbles, you know, I actually think that buff colour adds something to it. It sort of peeps through in places that I really enjoy. So a fun, painterly exploration in my sketchbook with no ambition for a great something at the end. But I can see that this could be a stepping stone for something else. I think that's my page done, and I'm going to stop there. The wonderful thing about acrylic paint is you can wait for it to dry and then add layer upon layer or detail over detail. And that means you can build up really rich and interesting pages. I hope you enjoyed this session. If you're after more practical, interesting, accessible art techniques, I've got a real range of art classes available to take instantly on my website. My hope is that my classes are practical, inspiring, and will give you some tools and knowledge for you to really make art that you love.